boyfriend in self-defense.
Gunshot wounds to the head and to the torso of the body.
But is this really a case of self-defense?
Shayna made a mention that she was thrown into the television.
She claimed to have been thrown into the bookshelf. There had been this fight between them, and he was taller than her and bigger than her, and he was throwing her around the apartment.
Or is it the work of a vicious and calculated green-eyed killer?
I shot him twice. Thought he was completely dead and he was laying there still.
It was our job to make sure that for him, justice was served.
On an October night in 2012, the police force of Highland Heights receives a 911 call. A Kentucky woman, Shayna Hubers, has shot her boyfriend Ryan Poston 6 times and claims that it is in self-defense.
Shayna reached out to law enforcement through the 911 call. She claimed that she killed Ryan Poston in self-defense. In fact, those were some of her first words. It was the first sentence that she relayed.
She made representations to the 911 dispatcher of this violent struggle, that there had been this fight between them, and he was taller than her and bigger than her, and he was throwing her around the apartment, and she was in this struggle for her life.
Campbell County 911. Ma'am, I killed my boyfriend in self-defense.
Following Shayna Huber's 911 call, police dispatchers make their way to Ryan's condo.
I responded to the call, and the other officer was working as well. He responded with me, and we got into the building, and then, because it was a secure building, we had a neighbor let us in. I asked the neighbor if there was any shots that they heard or anything like that. Neighbors didn't hear anything, but they were working on their apartment. We get up there, we contact the 911 operator, and we tell the 911 operator to tell the person to come out with their hands up, which was Miss Hubers.
The dispatcher's talking to Shayna Hubers the whole time. The dispatcher tells her that, when the officers get there, that she wants her to open the door, tells her to put the gun down, and Shayna did tell the dispatcher where the gun was and walk out the front door with her hands in front of her.
At that point in time, she came out with her hands out. She was yelling. I couldn't even make out what she was saying. And I told her to shut up and get on the ground. We put handcuffs on her and got her out to the car.
She's the one who identified the victim for us, because at that point in time, we didn't know who it was. But Shayna told them first on 911. She said the person that I killed was Ryan Carter Poston. And she mentioned that he was an attorney from Cincinnati.
The first thing we had to do was, once we took Miss Hubers into custody, I searched the apartment to make sure there was nobody else in the apartment that could hurt us or hurt anybody else.
Once in there, he did see the body of Ryan Poston laying in a pool of blood.
He was laying behind a kitchen table. And when I checked his vitals, I didn't feel anything, so I called for the squad personnel to come up. I wanted one person to come in because I didn't want them to disturb the crime scene how it was. I didn't turn any lights on or anything like that because you want to keep the scene as is. So I made sure that I watched how they were walking and where they were walking at. I wouldn't let them move a lot. I didn't let them move the body at all. Just had to move the shirt up so they could put the pads on the back so they could get a rhythm, to see if they can get a heart rhythm. And they could not find one, so they pronounced at that point in time.
When you go to that scene, you're looking for physical evidence that's going to corroborate a story or contradict a story. You already had a very detailed account on 911 of what the suspect said had occurred. So what you're trying to do is compare that story to the physical evidence and see if it matches or doesn't match. And that's what they were doing. The coroner would have been called. Anytime there's a body at a crime scene, we do have to call the coroner to take possession of it and process of it and remove it from the scene.
Immediately when I went in, I walked into a hallway, and straight through the hallway would have been the living room. Immediate right would have been a spare bedroom along with a bathroom. In the living room area, it was very cluttered.
Ryan was a bachelor. He lived alone. It was messy. It was cluttered, as most single 30-year-old bachelors would be, but it was orderly. Nothing was broken, nothing was out of place, nothing was knocked over. It was not what you would expect in the scene of some violent struggle that she had painted to 911.
We took the gun that was used, because she told us where the gun was, where she put it. The bullet casings on the ground, the spent casings on the ground, measurements of the apartment, IDs, just information at the time we thought was important.
I was actually born in Highland Heights. It is a small town community, and it's one of those communities where you kind of know everybody. And a lot of people that are born here stay here, and they raise their family here.
It's located in the center of Campbell County, about 7,000 residents, usually a quiet town. It's a nice little community.
Place that everybody in America would be happy to live at. I could live there in the blink of an eye. It's a very comfortable place. It's a trusting place. You trust your neighbors. You trust the police.
In fact, most people that live here because they feel relatively safe in our community, and we have an amazing police department that ensures their safety.
You don't ever hear of corruption, or you don't hear of any of that negative things that you hear in the news a lot. That doesn't exist in Highland Heights. I'd love it if my parents would move there and retire, because I would feel safe knowing they were safe. Criminal defense, that's what I do for a living, and when I think back at the number of cases that I have out of Highland Heights, it's almost non-existent. Other than the one that we're here for, that we're talking about, I can't think of any crime that comes out of Highland Heights.
Later that night, after being arrested at the crime scene, Shayna Hubers is brought to the police station for questioning, and her behavior doesn't go unnoticed.
Shayna was taken straight from the scene to the Highland Heights Police Department. According to the individual who transported her, a local police officer, she talked the entire way there. Again, we're only talking a couple minutes, it's right down the road, but this girl who was just taken out of this scene talked the entire time. When they arrived, they placed her in the interview room. She wasn't aware that she was being recorded. No one informed her of that. And when they placed her in the room, she was crying, crying, crying. And the moment the door shut and she was alone, she stopped instantly. Began looking at her nails, began checking her clothes, began fidgeting.
I'll get you a cigarette too. In just a second, you're fine.
And after I asked her the basic questions, who she was and who that person was that was lying on the floor, she told me his name and that he lived there, and I asked her if she lived there, and she said no. Asked her some other information, and then she started talking and just kind of like interviewed me at that point.
Officers came in and out, and you could see on this video the performance. If someone was in the room, it was theatrics, it was tears, it was blubbering, it was hysteria. If she was alone, it was calm and quiet. She would dance, she would sing, she would laugh, and she could not stop talking.
She thought she was smarter than everybody else, but she kept changing her story in a way to where, you know, he was grabbed by the throat and thrown around, to where he was very abusive in the past. You know, it was just a lot of things that were inconsistent that you don't usually get when you're dealing with domestic violence, murder, or shooting or something like it. It just didn't fit that profile.
It was all that she tried to appear like a victim. She tried to appear how afraid she was. She tried to put on this face that wasn't true. So all the things that she said, the singing, the dancing, the bouncing off the walls in the interview when nobody was there, that was who she truly was. She just didn't realize the rest of the world was going to see that.
Early into being placed in that room, she invoked her Miranda rights, meaning police could not question her any further. She was not asked another question, and yet she proceeded to talk for 3 hours. She would ask for someone else. When somebody wasn't responding to her, wasn't engaged with her, she would ask for someone who would. She even asked, "Can I talk to you?" And she proceeded for 3 hours, desperate to tell her story.
Can I talk to you? Can I have somebody to talk to? Did you hear any of the story?
As we were listening to her talk, there were moments where we stopped and just had to question whether or not we really heard the words she said. One of the most important was when she said that Ryan was very vain and he would not want to be deformed.
And she said, "I shot him right here. I gave him his nose job that he wanted."
I shot him right here. I gave him his nose job he wanted.
I can remember looking to Chief Birkenhauer and saying, "Did she really just say that?"
Shayna made a comment in the interview room that people probably wouldn't want to marry her now, knowing that she'd killed her boyfriend in self-defense.
I don't know if anyone will ever want to marry me if they know that I killed a boyfriend in self-defense.
That's what her concern was. As Ryan was laying there with the crime scene unit taking pictures of his dead body, she was wondering if anybody else would want to marry her.
At some point in time when the officers left her alone for a short time, she would start singing Amazing Grace.
How sweet the sound that sang away.
Shayna Hubers was certainly different, depending on who was in the room. When we had a female officer in that room, she talked like they were great friends.
You have very pretty teeth.
But when there was a male officer in that room, suddenly we could see her demeanor change. She started acting more meek and mild. She, blinked her eyelashes a lot at them, trying to get them to see things in a different way. She really thought that she could win them over. Each male that was in that room with her, it just didn't work.
The behavior in that room was not like anything you ever see in an interrogation room. She was strutting, she was snapping her fingers and chanting, "I did it, I did it, I did it."
I did. Yes, I did. I can't believe I did that.
She even muttered under her breath at one point when alone in the room, "I'm so good at acting," and laughed. To see somebody who had just murdered any individual, much less somebody they supposedly cared about, and dance and sing and celebrate, it was the most cold, depraved behavior I've ever seen in my career as a prosecutor.
So when I watched all those things she did when nobody was supposedly looking, I knew she was in trouble. She just showed her true character right there. She wasn't broken up inside. She wasn't scared. She wasn't any of that. She was thinking she was about to walk out of there and get away with it. And I knew she should be done for. The walls of fate were closing in on her.
On October 12, 2012, Ryan Poston, an attorney from Kentucky, is shot 6 times in his Highland Heights condominium by his on and off girlfriend Shayna Hubers. It is Hubers who calls 911 to report that she has killed Ryan, but insists that the killing is an act of self-defense.
So the following day, with the shooting happening the night of the 12th, the body would have been taken to autopsy. And at the autopsy, the medical examiner's job is from a scientific perspective to explain what happened to this individual. Clearly, we knew this was a case involving gunshots, but the medical examiner's job is to explain to us what those gunshots did to Ryan Poston that ultimately resulted in his death.
They'll look at different things. We'll get the clothes from the autopsy from Mr. Poston's body. We brought that back because we wanted to do some forensic testing on that as far as firearms. Someone is shot, there is some stempling if it's close range. And then we'll have entry wounds and how many there were, damage to the body as well. So we'll have other information from that.
Some bullets passed through, some bullets remained in him. They did remove a number of projectiles and fragments from inside his body. To be blunt, these shots tore him apart. They entered his body and they perforated vital organs. They traveled throughout. A number of them exited. They wreaked absolute havoc on the inside of Ryan's body.
Following the autopsy report, the death of Ryan is ruled a homicide.
Ryan was a very smart guy from a great family. Ryan had 3 parents, a father, a stepfather, and a mother who cared deeply about him. He had 3 younger sisters that he was very protective of. He came from a large extended family of aunts, uncles, cousins.
Family was very important to him. He was very important to family.
Very, very close-knit upbringing. He had lived all over the world. He moved around with his stepfather's job to different places throughout Europe and Asia, and ultimately came back to America to attend college and came back to Northern Kentucky, where he graduated from law school, and he had set up his private practice here in Cincinnati, and that's what he was currently doing, was trying to get that law practice off the ground.
Ryan was a law clerk for an attorney that was in my building on my floor. And we'd see each other, it'd be 9, 10 o'clock at night, and we'd pass each other, and just 2 single guys talking, and just clicked very, very well. But I remember the first time we went out, it was After work, we were bored, wanted to grab something to eat or something, and we'd go down the street, and women were all over him. And I thought, wow, this guy obviously has something about him. I just knew Ryan as a friend. I didn't understand him to be this really good-looking individual or anything else, because he was just my buddy. Women would come up to him and talk to him, and he wouldn't even have to go to them, but yet he was always nice to them. Women noticed Ryan, I guess is the best way to do it. He didn't exploit that at all. The guy was really a gentleman, never degraded women, was kind, polite all the time. It was the biggest funeral I've ever seen. I didn't know how a person could even know that many people.
There was an amazing turnout. People wanting to share their stories about Ryan, share their love for Ryan.
I had no idea there were this many people connected to Ryan. I seemed to be connected to the world. I mean, it was amazing, and everybody loved Ryan kind of the way I did. He was such an easy guy to talk to.
Shayna grew up far more modest than Ryan. She was the daughter of a public school teacher and a carpenter. Shayna was an only child. Her parents were older, and there is no doubt that Shayna was everything to her parents. Her entire life, Shayna was told she was special, that she was different, that things didn't apply to her. That's how her parents raised her. So she grew up believing that.
Ryan is 28 and Shayna Hubers is 20 when they meet in 2011. During their romance, Hubers is a psychology student at the University of Kentucky, about 80 miles from Highland Heights.
How does anybody meet nowadays? They met on the internet. Through a mutual friend, Ryan saw a picture of Shayna. He thought she was attractive, and he added her on Facebook, and they began communicating. And just like that, the ball started rolling towards his fate.
Both very intelligent. That's something he was interested in. Somebody who could match his level of intelligence, somebody who would engage in conversations about important things. And those were some of the reasons why he might have initially sought out Shayna Hubers and was attracted to her. Ryan's family told us that his relationship with Shayna was strained at all times and that she was the biggest source of stress for him. He could not get rid of her. It was like that little gnat that you can't ever swat. She was just always there.
I could tell that, she was a little bit clingy, but what he kept telling me was he would break up with her, but she just wouldn't take no for an answer. And I honestly kind of faulted Ryan at this. What do you mean she doesn't take no? It didn't make any sense to me what he was saying. It's like, tell her you're done, over with, move on. I mean, common sense things at that time. I didn't understand how this was not breaking up. Well, I ended up figuring it out once I personally saw some crazy things that she was doing. Like, he would come to me and said, I finally broke up with her, it's over with. And then a half hour later, she's walking down my hallway all made up and bouncing. Oh, hi, Adam. I barely knew the girl at all. We met, he introduced us, because again, he's nice and polite. And all of a sudden, she's just walking down my hallway and, what are you doing here? It was that weirdness. And then it kept amplifying. The weirdness kept amplifying.
There were people in his life that were concerned about Shayna Hubers. She would randomly show up walking in downtown Cincinnati. I remember somebody described it as dressed to the nines in the middle of the day when she knew Brian was going out to lunch. And they would just randomly meet on the streets. She lives in Lexington, Kentucky. She lived about an hour and a half from there. What was she doing in downtown Cincinnati? She would create these chance meetings with Ryan. She made up some big story about her aunt dying in Hawaii, and she was going to leave her $2 million, but she needed legal help. That was another way to get back involved with Ryan. Because as a young attorney, of course Ryan's gonna take a case. She would do anything she could to try to find a way to stay in Ryan's life.
She just simply wouldn't go away, and I was really getting concerned. Now, when I say really getting concerned, I'm not thinking anything awful would happen. I just thought, she's gonna be a problem.
Shayna explained it as though they had been in this long-term, permanent, committed relationship, but that wasn't reality. She acted as though that they had met several years prior and remained together, and that he had treated her poorly throughout this time, and that she had endured all this mistreatment, and that on this particular night, in the course of him asking her to leave, they got into this fight that escalated to his murder.
On the night of his murder, Ryan was getting ready for a first date with a new girl he'd recently met, a new girl who was most definitely not Shayna Hubers.
Ryan was supposed to meet Audrey Bolte. They were going to be meeting at a local establishment in Milford, Ohio, which is close to where she lived. They were going to have a couple of drinks and get to know each other. They had been communicating on social media, and this was the first time that they were going to meet in person.
Audrey Bolte had formerly been Miss Ohio. There were a lot of pictures out there of her on the internet, including one particular picture of her in this large yellow evening gown. It was that file that was in a saved carved image on Shayna's phone that she had been looking at that morning.
So Shayna Hubers would access Ryan Poston's Facebook all the time. It was well known that she knew his password. She would block certain girls when they asked to be friends with Ryan. If she was jealous of somebody on social media, she got into Ryan's account and she blocked them. So here's what's interesting about Audrey, is that Ryan and Audrey had been talking. They had been making their plans to meet up on October 12th, the day that Ryan was murdered. Shayna Hubers also became friends with Audrey Bolte on Facebook. Shayna Hubers had Audrey Bolte's Miss Ohio photo in her computer. She knew what was happening. And Ryan was not going to choose somebody else over her. She was going to make sure of that.
Because she knew he had those plans that night, she was trying desperately to stick around. She was finding any reason to be in Cincinnati. She was finding any reason to be with him, and he kept telling her, I need space. I need to be alone this weekend. I have plans. You're not included. Telling her to go away. She wouldn't. He went to work that day, and he told them what his plans were. He told them, I've got everything off my back, now I gotta deal with Shayna. The only reason Ryan went home is his plans changed. He was supposed to meet Audrey Bolte right after work. Audrey Bolte had to attend the funeral for somebody she knew, so she asked if they could bump it back a few hours.
But Ryan didn't care, it was fine. He was gonna be able to meet her later. However, that delay is what kept Ryan in his condominium. And that's what allowed Shayna Hubers to confront him one last time.
If Ryan had not gone home after work, who knows? Shayna probably still would have gotten to him somehow, but instead he went home, Shayna showed up there, and an hour later, 911 was called.
Following Ryan's murder, his on and off girlfriend Shayna Hubers is arrested and brought in for questioning. Despite asking for an attorney, Hubers continues to talk at length about what she has done, claiming she shot and killed Ryan in self-defense.
I don't have any serious injuries that I could have had, and I shot him in self-defense.
However, as they review the evidence at hand, investigators believe this was a murder fueled by pure envy.
The evidence collected from the apartment, the important things were clearly where he had been shot. He was seated in a chair at a table. That could be shown from his blood pattern, it could be shown from the position of his body, and it automatically dispelled this violent struggle of him chasing her around the room that she had painted for law enforcement. The shell casings were important. The shell casings, the grouping of them, showed that she had stood there the entire time and traveled around the table to access him better. The shots identified by the crime scene reconstructionists as being the first shots didn't have that stippling and those powder burns, but the subsequent one did, which means she got closer as she was shooting. She wasn't backing away from him, she was getting further on top of him. Those were the really important things to be taken from the scene. Ryan was going out with Audrey Bolte. She was a beautiful girl, and they'd agreed to meet up that night. Shayna knew. There were pictures on her phone of Audrey Bolte. So while Ryan is asleep in bed, in the middle of the night, she, on her phone, is looking at pictures of Audrey Bolte.
After the interrogation, Shayna Hubers is put into custody.
After being in the police department for a little over 2.5 hours, Sergeant Fornash came in and told her that she was being charged with murder.
Shayna was very calm when she went into custody. When she was told she was being charged with murder, her first question was, what degree?
There's no degree. It's murder, and then we took her into custody and they transported her down to the jail.
We don't have degrees in the state of Kentucky. And that was essentially it. She didn't ask a lot of questions. She didn't show a lot of outrage. She didn't show a lot of emotion. So when she went into custody, it was probably the calmest she had been the entire 3-hour interaction.
On January 16, 2013, in the case of Ryan Poston's murder, Shayna Hubers enters a plea of not guilty. The trial begins.
So Shayna's trial, her first trial, began in April of 2015, and that would have been the first time that her case was brought before a jury.
There was a packed courtroom. Ryan's friends and family were all there, and they're counting on us to bring in a guilty verdict. But more importantly than that, knowing how much Ryan loved the law and he loved the idea of justice, we felt the weight of that. It was our job to get the justice that Ryan loved so much, to make sure that for him, that justice was served.
Prosecutors argue that the motive for the murder is that Ryan wanted to permanently end his relationship with Hubers. Defense attorneys continue with their contention that the shooting is an act of self-defense and that Hubers is a victim of domestic abuse.
So on the first trial, the argument was that this was self-defense, that Ryan was the one that was attacking Shayna. And again, we go back to our crime scene reconstructionist. There is no physical evidence that shows that Ryan was attacking Shayna. She went forward, not backward. And that is not what someone who defends themselves does. That is what someone who is a predator does. She preyed on Ryan even in his injured state. After the first few shots, she kept going. She watched him as he made noises, and she lifted the gun and fired again.
Nothing happened to that girl. There was no violent struggle. There was no being tossed around. There was nothing of the sort. What you had was a man sitting down, telling her it was over, begging her to leave.
She was not thrown around that room. There was no evidence of it, and there would have been evidence. Keep in mind, Ryan is a bachelor. This is a bachelor pad. He's certainly not dusting once a week. So if anything would have been disturbed, we would have seen it. Shayna made a mention that she was thrown into the television, but when we showed up at the condominium, the television had not been moved. And we know it because there was so much dust that any bit of movement would have shown in that dust. She also made a mention that Ryan threw her into the bookcase. There were things on that bookcase that any tiny bit of pressure would have knocked over. Ryan had some antique ammunition sitting on its end. They were not pushed down. Ryan had pipes that were his grandfather's that were standing in a stand. Any movement toward that would have knocked them over if anyone was thrown into it. There was nothing. There was nothing that was done.
We had a cold-blooded, calculated murderer on our hands who was exploiting domestic violence, exploiting self-defense, trying to take the credibility away from the millions of other women in this world who live in domestic violence relationships because she wanted to kill someone.
Shayna trying to justify in some crazy psychotic way a horrible act that she did to a wonderful person.
Shayna Hubers lived her life through her social media or through her text messages. We literally got a calendar for the last year and a half of her life, and we could tell you where she was and what she was doing. But most importantly, we could tell you what she was thinking. Because remember, as prosecutors, we have to prove that she intentionally killed Ryan Poston. That's a hard thing, is to get into the mindset of another person. But with Shayna, she just opened the door for us. She gave us direct insight into what she was thinking and what she was doing just about every minute of the day.
Through the text messages, the prosecutors are able to showcase the extreme level of obsession Shayna Hubers has towards Ryan during their relationship. In one instance, after Ryan tries once again to break up with her, Hubers poses as a potential client seeking legal advice, just to get in touch with him through texting, hoping for any small bit of acknowledgement.
There were most definitely times that the glimpse into her phone, the glimpse into her mind, shocked the jury. There were times when you could see the puzzled look on their face where they just couldn't believe what they were seeing.
Despite the fact that Ryan wants nothing to do with Hubers at this point, a relative of Ryan's testifies at the trial that Ryan had texted claiming that Hubers was going so far as to break into his home. Although Shayna Hubers is imprisoned during the years leading up to her trial, she spends a lot of that time speaking with her fellow inmates.
As you figured out by now, Shayna can't help herself from talking. She actually cannot restrain herself from it. So you can imagine sitting in jail all those days, she had to talk about herself, had to talk about the case, and she talked a lot. She really grew to trust these girls. She told them things about her case, about their relationship, that ultimately became very, very important. She opened up to them about the fact that she was lying, that he didn't abuse her, that he wasn't abusive towards her, that it was her, that she had killed him out of jealousy. She told them that, and they came forward and told us those things.
They told us everything that she planned to do at trial. And one of the things that she wanted to do was to plead insanity. But she knew that that wouldn't fly because she's so smart and she has the IQ of Einstein. Again, remember, this is a narcissist we're talking about. Thinks she's smarter than everyone in any room she is in. And she thought that she was smarter than us. She thought she was smarter than the judge, but most importantly, she thought she was smarter than our jury. And that ultimately was her downfall.
The first trial was guilty. They sentenced her to 40 years. You know, the 40 years, I wish it would have been more. It was a start for the family to be able to, feel like justice had been served.
The presiding judge does not view Shayna Hubers as a victim of domestic violence and even considers a sentence longer than 40 years.
Yes, I was happy with the verdict, a lot of it because at least it was conclusion. What bothered me is after 20 years, even with a 40-year verdict, after 20 years I knew she would be eligible for parole and I knew that she had a decent chance of getting it.
Following the 2012 shooting of Ryan, his on and off girlfriend Shayna Hubers is found guilty of his murder and sentenced to 40 years in prison. She is eligible to apply for parole after 20 years of her sentence. However, a new challenge in this case is about to emerge.
Ryan's family, what they felt after that first verdict was a sense of justice for Ryan. They felt like they could finally start with healing, but that was short-lived.
There was an issue where the juror on that trial had a prior felony conviction for failing to pay child support. In the state of Kentucky, getting a certain amount behind on your child support can be a felony charge.
Under Kentucky law, if you are convicted of a felony, you are not able to serve as a juror. So we knew at that point in time that the judge was going to have no choice but to set aside the verdict.
With the 2015 verdict being set aside, Shayna Hubers' guilty verdict is overturned, and in August 2018, she is tried for Ryan's murder for the second time.
What we were most afraid of was relaying this information to the family, because we fought so hard for them. We fought hard for Ryan, and we knew we would do it again, but it was just the fact that we had to do it a second time in a very tearful phone call. The hardest call that I've ever had to make. But what I will say about Ryan's family, they immediately said, okay, what do we have to do?
First thing they have to contend with is the fact that she could actually walk away from this. And that was horrible in and of itself. Not only not have closure, but then the wound is opened up again, fresh as ever.
They were so supportive of us and the job that we had. They were patient when we told them it was going to take a long time, and they never lost faith, knowing that we would do what was right for Ryan. And even this setback that to us felt like it was the worst news we could possibly get, they were just right on board again and said, let's do it again.
August 8th, 2018 was the day to deliver opening statements. Your opening statement in a murder trial is your opportunity to tell the jury why they should listen to you, why your case is the one that has credibility, why you're going to be the ones in the courtroom speaking the truth. We had to offer them enough to let them know that the only dangerous person in this relationship was her, that the only abusive person in this relationship was her, that the only violent person in this relationship was her. Here they see this young, tiny woman, well-dressed, sitting at that table, and you have to let them know not to be fooled by her appearance, that the person sitting across from them can in fact be a monster.
We wanted the jury to remember this. Ryan was only going to leave that condominium either as Shayna Huber's boyfriend or in a body bag. For the second trial, we had a new witness who said she didn't even realize that the first trial had happened, but when she heard about it, she connected the dots, and she said, that was the girl that was at my counter. So earlier in the day, around dinner time, on the day that Ryan Poston was murdered, Shayna Hubers goes to the Dillards at the local mall and is talking to people there. And she made multiple statements saying that her boyfriend had broken up with her and was going to go out with another girl and she was going to kill him. She said it over and over again. At the time, of course, like other people, you don't put any truth into those statements until you hear that within just a few hours after those statements were made, her boyfriend was killed by her. We knew that there was no way that she was going to go through a second trial without taking that stand. She's a narcissist. Her own doctor tells us. It was really hard for her not to testify in the first trial. There was no way she was not going to take that stand in the second trial.
We had no idea what to expect and what we were going to need, because when somebody like Shayna is going to take the stand, which you have to prepare for that possibility, you don't know what they're going to say. She has no qualms about lying, and we know that about her.
So we approached everything from being able to refute her testimony. No matter what Shayna said, we were going to be able to refute it.
Ryan's sister, she is an absolute warrior of a person, and when she took that stand in the second trial, she had a teddy bear with her. She had brought it for a reason, and when she pressed the paw, it played Ryan's voicemail. And she explained to the jury that that was all they had left, a teddy bear with Ryan's voice inside.
We had to let Ryan's voice be heard. And that's exactly what Ryan's sister did. To see a family who has nothing left other than a voice coming out of a teddy bear. We're not just talking about Ryan losing his life. We are talking about every one of his family and friends who will never be the same. We have to talk about the empty table at every Christmas dinner and every Thanksgiving and every birthday. We have to talk about the lost children that Ryan could have had. This is more than just Ryan's life that was impacted.
She took the witness stand, and she did her best to account for some of her erratic behavior from that horrible police interrogation.
I shot him twice, thought he was completely dead and he was laying there still, and I shot him in the head.
I talked a lot about Shayna Hubers being jealous, but I remember starting the closing with Shayna's own words, because no matter what words come out of my mouth, nothing was as impactful as what came out of Shayna's mouth. I did it. Yep, I did it.
I did. Yes, I did. I can't believe I did that.
Can I say anything that's more powerful than that? Or that she gave him the nose job he wanted.
One of our last conversations we had that was good was that he wants my best friend who's a dentist to do his veneers and wants to get a nose job. And I shot him right here. I gave him his nose job.
Shayna talked a lot about a lot of things that didn't have anything to do with Ryan's murder. She tried to portray herself as a victim.
She took it as an opportunity to paint this as a relationship where he was sex obsessed, that he tried to make their relationship all about sex, but that wasn't what the evidence supported. The text messages were there, where Ryan was telling her it wasn't that important to him, where Ryan was telling her it's not that big of a deal, where she was saying, why don't you show interest in me? Why don't you have sexual desire for me? So the text messages told a different story than what she told on the stand.
So she tried to create this reality that just didn't exist. and tried to make herself look sympathetic when in reality, all she did was make herself look like a liar. She lied to her attorneys. She lied to Ryan. At that point in time, I don't know if there was anybody she didn't lie to. And having a defendant acknowledge on the stand that even the people that are on her team that she lied to is so hard to overcome. Because of course, who else would she have lied to? The jury.
After 5 hours of deliberation, the jury comes to a verdict.
On August 23rd, 2018, there was a guilty verdict. Shayna was sentenced to life in prison.
4 little letters, L-I-F-E, life. The level of commitment to this case over the years, 6, 7 years, is something that I've never seen before. Me and my coworkers, everybody at the police department, and most importantly, Ryan's family and friends. Nobody gave up. It would have been real easy to do that after the first verdict was set aside, but we tried to see it as the gift that we wanted, a second shot at life.
Obsession, jealousy, I'm not sure the word, but the fixation she had on him, again, looking back, I thought he had it under control, and now it's obvious.
Shayna was hands down the most obsessively jealous person I have ever met. It consumes her to where she could think of nothing else but Ryan, where he was at, who he was with, what he was doing, why not with her. The jealousy that she felt, the need to have him, absolutely consumed her. I think of Ryan all the time. I think of Ryan when I drive past the apartment complex. I think of Ryan when I hear certain songs on the radio for someone that I didn't know, but yet feel like I know so well through the glimpse into their world, through his phone, through his computer, through his Facebook. Somebody I feel like I had conversations with because I've read everything that went on in his life for so many years. I think of him far too often.
Ryan was the ultimate gentleman. While I was his senior, I actually looked up to him, kind to everybody. He never spoke down to people. He didn't treat people bad. Even when he was treated poorly by somebody, he would take the upper road. I still feel the void. There's never going to be anybody like Ryan.